know whereabouts. Get the set we need and would lose a lot of our food types. So becoming a beekeeper is a really great thing to do because the world does need more bees being looked after, and it's also just got this bonus of beautiful honey to harvest. And with our flow hive system, this is my father and I's invention, the flow hive, makes it easy for you to harvest honey directly from the hive without needing a processing room and all the equipment to go along with it. So what you see here is basically everything you need, and you can get going in beekeeping and harvest beautiful honey directly from your hive. So I'm going to be doing a brood inspection, which is basically taking off this top box and having a look down the bottom here where you've got wooden frames, the way it's always been, and the queen will be laying her eggs. You'll have honey stores, pollen stores, baby bees emerging from their cocoons and so on. So we'll get in there and have a look and show you how to perform a brood inspection, which is something you need to do periodically if you have a hive to make sure your hive is happy and healthy. And sometimes you'll need to intervene, and for instance, your queen might have died and you might need to introduce a new one, or there could be a pest you need to get on top of. We have a pest management tray down the bottom here, which is a great place to start with observations from around the hive. And I'm just pulling that tray out now, and you can see some cooking oil in there we've been using to catch the small hive beetle. That's these little black beetles in here, which aren't normally a problem for the hive. They generally keep on top of it, but when the colony gets weak, good idea to catch some of those beetles, otherwise they might take over and your hive could become a beetle nest instead, which we call a slime out. So catch the beetles when the hive's weak and use this pest management tray to help you service the hive. Okay, so let's get the smoker going. We're going to use a lighter today. Our blowtorch has run out of gas, but you don't need a blowtorch to light a smoker. So one trick with lighting a smoker is don't put too much fuel in at first, otherwise it snuffs it out and you need to start again. So they're a fun tool. Of course they do get hot, so wear your gloves if you're new to beekeeping until you're really aware of everything. And you can gently puff it there to feed the flame with oxygen. And look at that. It just rolled over and snuffed out my little flame. But don't be disheartened if it takes a few tries to get it going. We're going to light that again. Just by lighting what we have is sugarcane mulch here. It's not the easiest one to light actually because it packs together densely. Pine needles are a really good easy one to start with. And I'm rolling it over on the side because I don't want it to fall to the bottom and snuff out just yet. I want to get some flames going. If you've got questions, put it in the comments below. Also let us know whereabouts in the world you're tuning in from. We're here on the east coast of Australia. It's a beautiful sunny day. We have amazing weather, great day for beekeeping. The sun's a little hot, I'm really appreciating this mesh bee suit to allow some airflow. Okay, now when you start to get some flames, you can gently add a little bit more, and you're just slowly feeding it. If you stuff it full now, it'll go out for sure, and then you'll need to start again. That's it. Everyone's got their favourites of what they like to burn in their smoker, but generally I just use whatever I've got around, whether it be leaves or pine needles or garden mulch. In this case, we've got a bin of garden mulch, so we'll go with that. You can also use cardboard if you've got no mulch available. So even though I'm seeing nice flames, I'm still going to go gently, steady as you go, otherwise it'll go out. There we go. You want to see some good fire. If it's fire danger time, then using the metal garbage bin lid as a surface is a good idea, so that if you do get embers dropping, then they're not going right onto perhaps what might be dry leaves on the ground. And any questions, put it in the comments below and we'll get to answering those. We're here every week to answer questions. It's amazing to get so many questions coming in from all over the world. So fire away. It can be a great idea to smoke your hands as well if you're not wearing gloves, but do wear your gloves if you're new to beekeeping. Now it's really going, I can keep adding. And just bear in mind that the surfaces will get hot. What you want to see is nice bellows of smoke coming out like that. Nice, cool smoke. And you can keep stuffing it in. As it gets hot, use your hive tool to press it down, or wear your gloves. There we go. Now we can close the lid. And once we've got good smoke like that, we can go and blow some of it into the entrance of the hive, which has a calming effect on the bees. So here's our entrance around here, and I'm going to put the nozzle right in the entrance to get some smoke going inside. 3 puffs is all you need, and then leave the smoker near the entrance where the bees are flying in, and that way they'll get a whiff of smoke as they return home, and it'll help put them into a nice calming mood. Okay. Any questions coming through as we do our brood inspection?
Yes, Ida, is there any material that you shouldn't use in the smoker that would be toxic or harmful to the bees?
Yes, don't use newsprint that's got a lot of colours on it and things like that, because there'll be a lot of chemicals in that which will then be blown into the hive, which is not what you want around your honey and not what the bees would prefer either. So avoid those magazine style prints if you are using paper in your smoker. Okay, so looking in the window I can see that there's not a huge number of bees in this hive. Great idea to do an inspection, see what's going on, make sure the hive's happy and healthy. And I can also see that there's not a lot of honey at the moment. They're a little bit hungry. While you see a lot of yellow flowers down there, they're not producing nectar. And generally this time of year in this area, we do get a bit of a dearth, it's called, where we don't have enough nectar really for the bees to store enough honey for us to share some as well. Generally we get enough just to keep them ticking over, and later on in the year the flow will come on again with the melaleucas, provided it rains. Okay.
Yeah, Liam from TikTok would like to know what type of honey you produce.
So we get a real range and a variety, and you'll get different honeys in different frames as the bees fill it. Now you're not seeing any honey in the back window here, but you can see a difference in the colours of the frames just because of the wax build up over time. So it's a beautiful thing with the flow hive because you get to harvest different honeys from different frames, and to me that's just such a joy to be able to share those different flavours and the stories it brings to the table when you share it with your neighbours and so on. So having a variety of honey, I mean, I used to, as a commercial beekeeper, harvest honey from maybe 20 hives at once and then mix all of that honey together. And while it was still good honey, it's not nearly as nice as being able to separate frame by frame and get single frame honeys, because then you learn the nuances and you get to really learn what flowers are flowering and what the honey type is in that frame. So here we get the melaleucas, the paperbark, which is a really big flow that happens in the late autumn right through to spring, provided it rains. We also get the privet in the spring. We get the goya, which is a really light, blow your taste buds off. We get dark multi-tones through the winter time, and all sorts of honeys. I've got no idea where they come from. So it's a fun game over the years to learn more and more honeys. And you do that by smelling the blossoms on the trees and watching it come in and then tasting the honey. Sometimes you can even taste it just as it's coming in by just cracking a couple of little cells at the end of your frame, and that'll just help you make that link between what's flowering and what you're seeing coming in here. It's quite a neat little trick. Got questions, put in the comments below. Beginner beekeeping today, so no such thing as a silly question. We like to dedicate the first live of the month for beginner beekeeping to make sure there's a safe space for all those beginners to ask questions. And no such thing as a silly question. We all started off as new beekeepers once, so ask away. What I'm going to do next is take this top box off, and that way we can get in and do our brood inspection. But before I do that, I'm going to put on my bee veil and protect myself. I'm not going to wear gloves. I'm going to go gloveless, but if you're new to beekeeping, make sure you wear your gloves. Make sure you do your zips up, first of all the middle one, then you've got your two side zips. This is our mesh bee suit with the clear view, an innovation we came up with. Just helps you see down the cells and see bee eggs and things like that. Comes with an option to zip out the mesh or to have zip out the clear and put a mesh in, so you can have the best of both worlds there. And also it's a nice breathable mesh, which is very much appreciated in this hot sun.
We have some great questions from Linda. I'll ask one later. She had a question about the queen cells that I'll ask when you actually open up the hive. But she just wanted to know, first of all, can you tell if the bees are putting nectar in the cells opposed to eating it just by looking at the bees?
Yes, you certainly can. So if we have a look at this side window here, I'm just having a little look and I can see the bees are pretty hungry because there's no nectar coming in. What you'll see is shiny nectar glistening in the cells if they are bringing nectar in. This rear window tells a story too, and it's a very helpful story because you can watch the nectar fill. And what we're seeing here is hungry bees because they've taken all the honey away from this rear window. But an example would be if these were all full and then suddenly they got hungry, you'd see this checkerboarding effect where you'd have a cell going all the way out and full, and then empty, and then another one going all the way out and full. And that's what you'll see when the bees are going from on a good flow to being hungry. So now is not a great time to harvest honey because the bees aren't bringing in enough to increase their supply. Okay, so next we're going to check our smokers still going and then start loosening up the hive so we can take off the top box. So if you've been standing around chatting, your smoker will often go out and it'll need a few puffs to really get going again. And while we're here, let's just top it up to make sure it's got plenty of fuel in there. It's hot now, so wear your gloves or be careful when adding the new fuel. So we're just stuffing it down with the hive tool like that, giving it a few good puffs, getting some nice cool smoke. Some people like to top it with some fresh green grass to make sure the smoke's nice and cool. You don't want flames coming out the end. We have this grid here that helps stop that, but flames coming out the end of a smoker Could burn bees, we don't want that. You want nice cool smoke. Okay, another puff here before we go ahead. And now we're going to get around, wedge the hive tool in here and see if we can open up. Now another thing I just noticed is the hive's quite light. So that's telling me that the frames are empty. That's the main method used by beekeepers if they don't have the windows, is what's called hefting the hive, where they simply lift it and use that to gauge how full it is. Okay, so always a bit hit and miss whether it's the excluder's going to come with the top box or not. In this case it looks like it wants to go with the super, so we're going to just crack it off like that and get around and do all the corners of the hive before lifting the box off. So we're just wedging our tool in there, loosening it up. Now that top box should be able to come off. Feels like the frames are coming up with it a little bit. So if you find that, see how these frames are connected to the top box, and use your J-Hive tool just to lever them down like that. That's it. Now you're free to take the super off. And I'm going to place it on an end in front here. That way I'm not squashing any of the bees that are underneath. Get someone to help you if it's too heavy, or take some of the frames out to lighten the load. Once you've cracked the top box off, add a little bit more smoke, calm the bees. You'll notice it will agitate them momentarily, and then it'll have a calming effect. Any more questions coming in?
Yeah, we've got so many questions. So many great questions. First one is, how many colonies would you recommend for a first-time beekeeper with a Flow Hive 2+?
So, the important thing is to start, but I would always recommend getting more than one hive. That way, if one has a problem, like it loses a queen, you can share a frame from another hive, and if it's got eggs on it, they can raise a queen. So it makes you more sustainable as a beekeeper, or self-sufficient, because you can use the resources from one hive to prop up one that has an issue. And it also helps you with the honey flow, because sometimes you have a weak hive that doesn't get any honey stores through that season, whereas some of your others might be really pulling in the honey. So it increases the chances of getting a really nice lot of honey in your season. But one's better than none, two's better than one, and so on. Okay, we're just taking off the queen excluder. So this is a grid that the queen is too big to get through. And what that means is the queen doesn't come up and lay in your flow frames or your honey collecting areas. And that way, when the parts move in the flow frames or you're harvesting conventionally, you won't damage any brood because it's down here below the excluder. Now what I'm seeing here is not a whole lot of bees. This colony's a little bit weak. And I'm also seeing straight away that a lot of empty cells, showing the bees are really quite hungry. So some people would choose to feed their hives. Generally you don't have to feed them here, but a hive like this you could feed to help prop them up through a time where there's not many flowers. But let's keep doing a brood inspection as you think of your questions. Beginner beekeeping today, no such thing as a silly question. Chime in, let us know your thoughts, and we will try and answer your questions as best we can. So look at that. So, very dry. I can see one larvae down a cell. I can see a lot of young larvae on this side, which is good. So I know there's been a queen laying relatively recently. Give us a thumbs up if you can see the white grubs down the cells in this area. That's them going through their caterpillar phase. They'll spin a silk cocoon around themselves and spend about another 11 days in a cocoon before emerging as a worker bee ready to go about the chores of the hive.
We had a question from Linda earlier. She wanted to know what the difference was between swarm cells, queen cups, emergency cells and superseder cells.
Okay, so you can get a rough idea of what's going on when bees create the queen cells. So it's not necessarily a complete rule, but bees will do a whole lot of small little queen cups when they're in a hurry to make a new queen. So let's just see if we can find any. So we've got brood here, which is good. I was a bit worried when I first looked in that we didn't even have a queen, but we saw young larvae on that one. We're seeing nice brood, so it looks like this hive is okay, just a bit hungry. We're not seeing any honey around the extremities like you normally do. This side's got hard packed brood, which is great to see. Very nice there when you've got brood all the way across the frame. Not seeing any queen cells or queen cups. I'll keep looking. Okay. Look at that. That is a frame that's been recently inserted, and you see they've done a beautiful job of their naturally drawn comb, and they're laying their brood in it. So this hive is actually doing okay despite being a bit hungry. Excellent. Look at this drone bee that got caught in some wax as we manipulated the excluder. Stuck upside down in the wax. You can tell it's a drone bee because its eyes connect together in the middle, and it's a bit bigger. These don't have stingers, so they're good ones to play with compared to the ones that do have stingers. We might just free it from its wax there. I'm going to do that by gently scraping the wax away underneath, and there it is. Big drone bee. People often confuse them with the queen in the beginning in their learning, but the way to tell is their eyes join in the middle there, just at the tip of the hive tool. And they're big teddy bear shape compared to the worker bees. So the drones are the male bees. Their job is to spread DNA around by flying off each day to a drone congregation area, which might be a nice spot in the bottom of a valley, nice clear area, and a whole lot from all different hives will fly there each day hoping for a virgin queen to be flying by. And then the chase is on, the mating game on the wing, with up to 30 drones will get to mate with a queen on that mating flight. And she'll return to the hive with enough sperm to last for up to 6 years of laying. They don't tend to do much chores around the hive, so much so that when times are tough and there's not a whole lot of nectar available, the worker bees will rip their wings off and kick them out to die so there's not more mouths to feed. And that's the rough life of a drone bee. Keep the questions coming in.
Yeah, Cedar, we have someone wanting to know how much that flow super would weigh when it's full of honey.
So when it's full of honey, you've got roughly 3 kilograms. Now this per frame, so that's 18 kilograms of honey, and then each flow frame is just under a kilo in itself. So you've got 24 kilograms in the box, and then the weight of the box as well. So maybe 26 or so kilograms when it's totally full. So good idea to get some help to lift that, or take some of the frames out before you lift that off. When it's nice and light, because the bees are hungry, then it's pretty easy to lift off. Okay, you can go back into the hive. Let's pull out another frame. What have we got here? We've got some drones in the cocoon phase. So there's the drone brood there. Notice the difference between the drone brood and the worker brood. The drone brood sticks out like little mounds, and the worker brood is flush with the cell surface. That's how you can tell whether it's males or females in their cocoon or brood phase.
Okay, so we have a few questions about starting with bees. This person's in South Australia. They said it's been very dry. Most flowers are dead. Is it too late to start a hive now?
It's usually not too late, but ask some local knowledge or chime in if you're from that area. So generally in Australia, you can be starting new colonies depending on where you are through the spring and summer, and sometimes even in the autumn. Around here we have a subtropical region where we can start just about any time of year. So get some local knowledge on whether it's time to get your colony, and regardless, it's a great idea to get your equipment ready, get it all painted so you're not caught out when you do get your bees. You really want to have your equipment ready to go. Now, here we have a queen in a queen cell, and you can tell she's in there because the tip is closed. Isn't that neat? So this hive, for whatever reason, has decided to raise another queen even in these lean times. She's likely to make a piping noise soon. And she may be planning to supersede the hive, but she may also not come out on top and end up getting stung or balled. So generally the hive sorts it out, so there's usually just one queen in the hive. If there's multiple virgin queens emerging, let's say the hive will be wanting to raise new queens in a hurry, let's say they've lost their queen, then they're likely to put a whole lot of queen cells around the extremities of the frame, and then what you'll get is the first one emerging will make a piping or tooting noise, the ones still in their cells will call back, and the virgin queen will go and sting through the cocoon and kill the rivals. So it's quite brutal, but that's how they sort it out, so there's just one queen at a time. It would be very nice if they could have a dozen queens, because queenless is an issue that happens to hives, and that would take that issue away. But nevertheless, this is how they do it. So checking your hive is queen right is part of beekeeping. Making sure you're looking in here when the hive is low on numbers, check and see that you have brood. And that way you know you have a laying queen. This would be a good frame to do a split with because you've already got a queen just about to emerge. She's got a 16-day cycle, so she will emerge in this next week or so, and then she will be busy going on her mating flight, and that'll be the only time she leaves the hive unless the hive plans to swarm. Keep the questions coming in.
Yeah, we have a question about the queen. Do worker bees migrate to a queen, or do you have to order a queen and some worker bees?
So the way you get started in beekeeping is, the easiest way is to order what's called a nucleus, which has basically a going little mini hive with some of these frames in it, usually 4 or 5, and it'll have honey stores in there, it'll have pollen stores, it'll have brood in its various phases. It's going little mini hive. You can situate it where you want in your yard. When you have a nice warm sunny day, get in your bee suit, get out your smoker, transfer them into your brood box, look after them, and they'll grow from there. However, there are many other ways to get started in beekeeping. You could catch a swarm, or you could order a package, which is an artificial swarm online. You could take a split from a friend by taking some of the frames out of their box and putting them into yours. Or you could do what's called a bait hive, where you try and lure a swarm into your hive. Really only works where you've got a lot of beehives and it's springtime when the bees are swarming a lot. But you could set up your brood box near a bunch of other hives, and you might even like to add a scent of lemongrass oil, or you can even buy a product called Swarm Commander, and you may just have a colony move right on in, and that's called a bait hive. More reliable way to get started would be to order a nucleus or take a split from a friend. Okay. We've got a lot of brood on that frame too, so this hive is doing well. And look at the pollen on these legs, look, very white pollen. Haven't seen that for a while. It's good to see a variety of pollen in the hive, showing that they're really collecting protein from all different sources. Pollen is their protein source, nectar is their carbohydrate, and like us, they need a balanced diet of proteins. So you want to see them collecting all different types of pollen and fermenting it into their bee bread, which you see here. Oops, sorry about that, bees. I just scraped the hive tool across the frame. In here, you'll see that there's different colours down the cells. Give us a thumbs up if you can see different coloured bee breads down there, where they've stored the pollen, topped it with their special source of enzymes and a little bit of honey, and let it ferment like a good sourdough, so it's more easily digestible by the developing larvae. Very cool. Good to see that variety in there. A lot on this side too. Let's see if we can get you a better shot in the sunshine. Have a look here. I might even shake these bees off the frame so you can get a good look at this area here. So to get bees off a frame, you do a short, sharp shake like this. And now you can get a much better view of all the pollen down the cells. Give us a thumbs up if you can see all those beautiful colours of bee bread. The fermented pollen sourdough. We've got whites, we've got oranges, we've got creams. Very good. So they've got plenty of pollen stores, but what they're lacking is their carbohydrate, the nectar and the honey. So hopefully they'll find some soon. And if you've got a dry hive like this, not a bad idea to feed it with some sugar syrup, or you can even just throw some dry sugar syrup, dry sugar. And always use white sugar, not raw sugar. Raw sugar has impurities that aren't good for bees. So you'll be putting some white sugar down a dry frame where there's not much going on, perhaps one of the edge frames, and you can put that frame back in. The bees will collect some water, soften that up, and use that as a carbohydrate source to keep going. Or you can make any type of feeder. We've got videos showing you how to make liquid sugar feeders that go through the hole in the lid. Let's have a look at this next frame and chime in with your questions. Beginner beekeeping today, so ask away with any questions you like.
Yeah, Cedar, how much of a flowered area do you need for a hive, and can you just have one hive?
Yes, you can just have one hive. Many people just have one hive. Slight disadvantage is if they go queenless, you'll have to get a queen from somewhere to get your hive queen right again, but nevertheless, some people can go for many years with a single hive without any issues, and that can be a great way to get some bees in your garden and get to harvest some beautiful honey for your friends and family. And what was the other part to the question?
How much of a flowered area?
So we plant flowers in the garden like this, not so much to get a honey crop, because you need to plant many acres of flowers to get a honey crop. We plant them to attract all the native bees and just for a beautiful aesthetic. You find a lot of native bee species, like here we have the blue banded bee, we have the teddy bear bee, we have all sorts of masked bees, we have the fire-tailed resin bee, and they all come to the garden, and you never know, you might just be creating stepping stones for those native bees who really do have a short range and need those flowers across our urban landscapes. So planting flowers is great to attract all your native pollinators, but not necessarily going to make a difference to your honey crop unless you plant a lot of them. So if you've got acreage, you could certainly plant flowers that make a difference to your honey crop. But one of the wonderful things about beekeeping is you don't necessarily need any land to get a real amount of produce you can share with your friends and family. You can actually just put a beehive on a balcony with not a flower at all, and they will forage up to 6 mile, 10 kilometre radius and bring all that nectar back into your hive and make the wonderful thing we call honey. A lot of pollen on this frame. If you have a look, we've got more pollen, which is great. And oops, just upset the bees a little bit. I accidentally squashed one with my finger, and that set them off just banging into me a little bit. So I'm going to make sure the smoker is going again. So when you notice the tune change like that, good idea to get out your smoker, get it going again if it's gone out, and just blow a little more smoke into the hive and give them a moment to settle again. Smoke your hands too to mask your own mammal smell. After all, we are intruders into the hive. And bees have long been defending their colony from intruders going for the gold in the hive. Okay, you'll notice the sound. Have a listen to this. You notice the sound of all of their wings beating as they fan the smoke around and trying to clear the smoke from their hive. But after a while, it'll have a nice calming effect. Any more questions?
Yeah, do flow hives swarm as much as normal hives? Sorry, do bees from flow hives swarm as much?
So it depends is the answer, like many things in beekeeping. The reason why a colony swarms is if they're overcrowded and there's not enough cells for the queen to lay her eggs. So whatever kind of hive you have, managing that will be managing swarming. So one thing to do, and one thing you can more easily do with a flow hive, is harvest honey when the frames are full. When you beekeep conventionally, you often wait till all the hives are at a similar level where the honey's full to do a batch processing, because it's such an ordeal to harvest honey conventionally that you want to do a whole lot of it at once and dedicate several days to the process. With the flow hive, you can easily tap off honey as they fill it. So that's one advantage you have with a flow hive, is as you see it really filling in typically the springtime, if it's filling quickly, you can start harvesting some of the honey, making sure there's enough space. Otherwise what can happen is the brood box here can get what's called honey bound, where all of the cells are full of honey, there's nowhere for the queen to lay, and that will likely trigger swarming if it's the springtime. Now, having said that, there's a lot of other things you can do to do what we call spring management. So what we recommend is in the springtime, you take a split from your hive and start another one. If you don't want another hive, somebody else surely will, and you'll be helping them get started. And what that'll do is it'll take a bunch of these frames out, create some fresh new real estate for the bees to create their comb, and more space for the queen to lay her eggs, and that will limit that primary swarming trigger. Now, if you don't want to take a split, you can just cut some of the comb out. Typically they've got a lot of honey on the edges. If you're using naturally drawn comb without foundation, you can just cut the comb right out and put the frame straight back in towards the middle. If you're using foundation, you'll need to prepare some frames to swap out and take those ones back to the shed for processing. And that way you are adding fresh new area for the bees to create the comb and the queen to lay, which will limit that swarming trigger. Other things you can do is adding another box, and that's quite common, especially in the colder areas. Add another brood box or add more honey supers to run bigger colonies. If you have a bigger colony, your hive will be less likely to swarm. I like to run simple one brood box, one super, just because it's very easy to manage, and the way I like to manage it in springtime is just take splits from the busy hives, or take some honey away from the brood box and making sure you're harvesting the honey when it's full in the hives. So whatever method you choose to do, it's important to make sure you're managing the swarming tendencies, otherwise you'll have half your bees taking off, potentially landing on your neighbour's washing line or something, and then you'll have to go and collect it and so on. So springtime is when you do what's called spring management, which is a lot about preventing your bees from swarming by making sure there's space in the brood box for the queen to lay. Long answer, but basically it's the same whether you've got a conventional hive, a Langstroth hive, or any type of beehive. Making space in the brood nest is the important thing to limit swarming.
Okay. John caught a swarm a few days ago, had a quick look in the flow hive, and they have started drawing comb. Does that mean they have a queen?
Not necessarily, but most likely. Generally, the old queen gets kicked out with the swarm bulb, and it's very unusual not to have a queen when you catch a swarm, but perhaps the queen died, or perhaps the swarm bulb was queenless. That would be unusual. They'd normally go back to the hive. If they've started drawing comb, that's a great sign, but you won't know you have a queen until you've got eggs or young larvae down those cells. So it sounds like you've done well. You've caught the swarm, you've checked in and had a look at the beautiful comb they're building, which is a really wonderful stage to keep an eye on, especially if you're doing foundationless frames. You want to make sure they're building nice and straight. Once they get the idea, they'll keep building straight after that. And it's just beautiful to see their brand new wax as the swarm builds their comb. And what you should see in another week or so is brood larvae down the cells, or eggs.
Okay, Mark is new to beekeeping. He purchased a package. Last brood inspection indicated honey stores on 7 of the 10 frames around the edges. Should he stop feeding the hive now?
Okay, so you purchased a package,
Yeah.
been feeding the package, and you must have transferred them into your brood box, because now you've got a 10 frame brood box and you've got honey stores. So I think you could stop feeding them now if you've got honey in your frames, but ask some local knowledge about what's ahead in your season where you are. It's always good to get local knowledge of the seasonality and whether you should feed bees or not. Here we generally don't, because we've always got something flowering. Having said that, this hive could do with feeding, because I can't see any stores of honey, but they will be bringing some in. They're just consuming it as quick as they can bring it in.
How about if you have a thriving flow hive brood box, however the bees will not move into the super? Do you have any suggestions?
Okay, so seasonality is important, so get some local knowledge on what's happening in your season and whether you'll be expecting them to be growing as a colony and starting to store honey. And if you've got a good season ahead of you, then as you've done, you're adding your super. Now, if you are getting impatient and the colony's not expanding up into the super box, and you don't want to wait, you want to see some results, there are some tricks you can do. One of them is add some wax to the flow frames. The easiest way to do that is to scrape some of the wax off the top of the frames. If they are indeed ready for a super, they've probably started building up wax on top. Now you can scrape that off with a Hive tool and just mash it into the flow frame surface. You won't damage the flow frames. Put that on the window side. Enjoy watching them recycle that wax in that local area. That'll get them started on the flow frames, and if there is a good nectar flow and a lot of bees in your box and your hive's healthy, they'll start storing honey in your flow frames too. But often it's a patience game when two things coincide: a healthy colony with a lot of nectar available for the bees to collect and store excess. And they often store more than they need, so we can share some too. But often we do need to be patient as we let the colony build up. When you open the side windows, you want to see a lot of bees in the box. When you see a lot of bees in there, they'll be starting to work the flow frames. If you want to have a look at some of the center ones, that's where they'll start storing nectar first.
Charlene has 3 full frames for the first time in her super. She's just wondering, when is the best time to take the honey? Is it best to wait until all of the flow frames have been filled?
You can go ahead and start harvesting. That's the wonderful thing about flow frames, is you can just harvest a little bit. You might choose just to harvest half a frame by putting the key in halfway. And that'll get you a beautiful amount of honey for taking back to your table, and we'll be leaving the rest for the bees if you're not quite sure. So go ahead and start harvesting, but also ask some local knowledge about what's ahead in the season. You may be making the choice to leave it all for them for a long winter ahead, depending on where you are in the world. And look at this pollen. This is amazing. Very pollen rich, this hive. A lot of bee bread in here. Give us a thumbs up if you can see all of those beautiful colours there. Does it look better in the sun, Callum? Should I flick it around to the sun like that? And you can see down the cells all of that beautiful oranges and whites. So they're getting plenty of pollen. No problem there. It's more about the nectar, which I can't see any of. Great questions today. Keep it coming in. Beginner beekeeping, so don't be shy. Ask away.
Another question, I think you touched on it before. How much space do you need to safely have a hive if you live in suburbia?
So the amazing thing about beekeeping, and especially flow hive beekeeping, is this is the footprint. You only need this amount of area to keep your hive. So you'll find that it's very popular in cities. It's very popular on rooftops, on balconies. My sister kept hives in Berlin on a balcony for a number of years, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to get some real produce and do some farming even if you don't have land. So that's one of the reasons why beekeeping is so popular. And with the flow hive, you don't need to dedicate a room in your house as an extraction room either. The extraction system's all built in, so you don't need to purchase all that additional equipment, and you don't need to make that big messy space we once did when we would set up our extraction room with the benches and the hot knife and the centrifuge and all the buckets and sieves and paraphernalia that goes along with conventional harvesting. It all happens right here in the hive, and you're simply filling up your jars, which hopefully we can show you soon. But have a look back through our live streams if you want to see honey being harvested live from a flow hive. Okay, so what we're going to do is start putting this hive back together, and we're happy that it's got a laying queen, and we should keep an eye on it in terms of nectar coming in. What we want to see is them collecting some nectar and starting to deposit in the cells. If it goes on with not enough stores, then feeding them is a good idea. You're better off feeding them, even though sugar is not ideal. flower nectar is better for bees, you're better off feeding them than letting them starve to death. So some areas of the world you will need to feed your bees at some time of the year. Around here we rarely do, but we could choose to feed this hive because I can see it's really low on any honey stores. So to put it back together, I'm going to try and remember which order the frames went in. And the reason why I'm doing that is I don't want comb from one frame pressing into another. That'll make an area that's unserviceable by the bees, and those pesky little hive beetles could get in there, take advantage of not being chased by the bees, and lay thousands of eggs. So what we'll do is we'll put this frame back in. This one has a bunch of brood on it, so that actually goes deeper in the hive. And if you can't remember what order they went, don't worry, just keep a lookout and make sure the frame isn't pressing against another one. This hive doesn't have many bulges of honey because there isn't a whole lot of honey. This one is full of pollen, and that one went on the edge. Look at that beautiful bee bread. So another thing to be aware of is the bee space. Once we've got all our frames in, bees are very fussy with their spacing between their combs. So we want to make sure all the frames are pushed together, which gets the bee space about right, and make sure that the bees won't start building comb between frames.
We do have a few more questions if you've got time.
Time for a couple more questions.
Yeah, why would bees abandon their hive?
Okay, there's a few reasons why bees would abandon their hive, and it's called absconding. Now, one is it's been taken over by hive beetles. That's a common time where if the hive beetles lay thousands of eggs and they're really taking over, it's called a slime out, then the remaining colony might decide to pack up shop and move to a better home where the hive beetles aren't present. And they'll eat as much honey as they can, fly off and set up somewhere in a tree hollow or a mailbox or something like that. And that way they've left their troubles behind. And sometimes you'll get genetics that can cause hives to abscond before for unknown reasons. So if you're having trouble with the colony absconding, then try again. Perhaps order colony from a queen breeder where you've got great genetics of a colony that wants to stay, is nice and productive, and so on.
And will the bees naturally fill the flow frames, or do you need to wax them?
So we don't wax them at all here, but it's not uncommon for people to want to put some wax on the frames, which you can go ahead and do by melting some wax and painting some on. Or what's easier than that is you can scrape some off the top of the frames and just mash chunks of wax. You don't need honey, you're actually after the wax, into the flow frame surface. The bees are great little recyclers. They'll get in there, recycle that wax onto the flow frame parts. But generally we do nothing, a little bit of patience, and the bees will make them their own. Cover all the flow frame parts in wax and start storing their honey. Sometimes it happens very fast and sometimes it's slow, depending on all sorts of things like the strength of your colony, nectar availability, and even genetics. Beautiful example of naturally drawn comb there, where the bees have made their comb, connected it to the comb guide, and they've used this for brood. You can tell by the darker colour. And look at that, we have what I wanted to see, some glistening cells of nectar. So they are bringing in something, which is better than nothing. So I'm happy that they are at least storing a little bit of nectar that they can use to keep themselves going. And here's the queen too. So she's just near my thumb, which is a marked queen in blue. So if somebody could chime in, let me know what year that is. Okay. There it is. So there's a colour code that helps you understand which year their queen was raised in. So if you're buying queens from a queen breeder, they will usually be marked with the colour code for that year. That way you can tell whether she's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, or even older. Notice how her abdomen is longer, and she has bigger strides than the other bees. She's a little bit confused because I keep putting my finger in the way. And she's also been out of the hive for a while. It's the very first frame we pulled out, had the queen on it. And she's wondering where her whole colony's gone. And there she goes. Give us a thumbs up if you can see the difference between the queen and the worker.
And Cedar, if you're really keen and you wanted a lot of hives, how many could you fit in a backyard?
So look, some places, although it's rare, do have regulations on how many you can have in your backyard. So you might want to check local rules before you go adding 30 beehives to your backyard. There's also some sensibility in it, because if you have that many hives in your backyard, then you will have a lot of bee flights that could potentially bother neighbours. So just check in, make sure your fascination with bees isn't bothering any neighbours next door. But you can go ahead and have a lot of bees in a backyard. I certainly know people that have 30 hives in their backyard in an urban area, and it doesn't seem to cause a problem. But there's other people who prefer to just keep 1 or 2 or 3 in a backyard to make sure that their bee flights aren't bothering any neighbours. Here we go. Just here is the queen with the blue dot.
Sorry, I'm not sure if you just answered this, but how close can you have the hives to each other?
So you can have them as close as you like. Generally in conventional commercial beekeeping, they'll have them wall to wall on pallets. So they'll be sticking 4 hives to a pallet, literally jammed up against each other. The bees are clever enough to know which hive's theirs. You get a little bit of drift in between hives, but generally you'll get the bees returning to the right colony. The reason why we like to space them out a little bit is so that you can get to the observation windows on the side. And the further apart you have them, the less drift you get, bees drifting from one hive to the next. Although if you don't want any drift, you'll need them 10 metres apart or more. So when you put them in close proximity, you do risk disease moving from one hive to the next if there's a prevailing wind, blowing bees down the row, and then you get a sharing of those bees to the next hive. So we've got a baby bee here just emerged from its cocoon. You can tell by its fluffy hair on its thorax. And it's stumbling around, taking its first steps. And here's the queen bee. You can tell the difference between the workers and the queen, even though the genetics start off the same. She's fed royal jelly for her entire gestation. She gets supersized with a long abdomen and the ability to lay a couple of thousand eggs a day for up to 6 years of laying, which is extraordinary. There she is there. She doesn't have a barbed stinger. I've never been stung by a queen, but she can go ahead and sting without the stinger being pulled out. She doesn't want to play ball today. Sometimes she'll walk onto your hand for a good show and tell.
We actually have a request for Callum. Can we please have a shot of the location and the view? A few people are commenting on our amazing weather and amazing location.
It is a particularly amazing day today with
you can
nice
see the ocean
clouds.
out there.
You can see the ocean, and we've got light winds. Perfect day for beekeeping. Nice warm sunny day. We're going to put this frame back into the hive now, or at least let the queen go back in. There she goes. And that way we can put this frame back in without risk of squashing the queen. It's often useful to use smoke to move bees out of the way if they're not moving. But there we have it, our colony back together. Just checking again to make sure you're not pressing comb against comb. And we're ready to close up the hive. Last step is to make sure the frames are pressed together so any excess space is on either side. And that way you've got the correct bee space so the bees don't start building comb between the frames. Okay, this can go right back on. This is your queen excluder, and while there's no bees crawling all over it, we'll take the opportunity to put on the top box. However, there is bees crawling all over the bottom of this one, so what we're going to do is add some smoke to clear those bees. Smoke's a good tool for moving bees along as well as calming them. That way when we lift up the box, hopefully there'll be less bees. If you could pass me the hive brush. There we go, the bee brush. That can be useful too for brushing any bees out of the way as you close up your hive. We do our best not to squash any bees. It can be a challenge sometimes. And what we're going to do is just upend this box like this. It's not too heavy. If it is heavy, just be mindful of how you lift it. We're doing our best to put it back nice and square, making sure the bees are out of the way, and then lining it up just by manually moving it so it's all nicely lined up for next time. Now we can go ahead, put on our windows. You don't want to leave the windows off because what will happen is the sun will shine in. You'll have a solar wax melter effect. Could get too hot in there if the sun's shining in, and the wax could actually start to melt. So make sure you put your window covers on. Do up your L screws to then hold your window in place. Next we have the rear window cover. Goes like that. And then finally your gabled roof. Now, the one with the cutout goes towards the harvesting side. There we go. Now hives back together. Time for one last question.
One last question. The question we get most often is basically, how do the flow frames work? Ashley's asking, how does the dispensing nozzle on the front let the honey flow out? I have beehives and I'm interested in these, but unsure how the honey flows out like that.
Okay, so it took my father and I about a decade of inventing, testing different ideas in the hive, and eventually we cracked it. And if you have a look at Flow Hive Full Reveal, you'll see a video showing the first jar of honey coming out directly from the hive, and it was a very exciting moment. And the way it works is the flow frame's built with a partially drawn matrix, and when the parts move, each cell splits in half like that, and that allows the honey to flow down through what's now a zigzagging pathway to a trough at the bottom and out of the hive. And when you're finished, you put the key in the top slot and turn it, and the frames move back to cell formed position. The bees will then wax all the parts up, recycle any capping that they need to tear down, use it to repair the cells, and the whole process starts again. So it's almost a magical experience to watch it flow out of the hive, and it's quite mesmerising and often a great family experience as well. And it's totally changed how the harvesting process is done. It's been in the wild now for almost 10 years, so it stood the test of time, and in all corners of the globe people are harvesting successfully with their flow hives in this totally new way. Now there's one more bit I'd like to add to that, and that's that when the parts move, there's a wax bridge. So we've created a V-shaped gap here, so when they move and move back, the wax is then dislodged so these moving parts don't catch the bee's knees. And that way we have a system that has minimal disturbance to the colony while we harvest honey gently and easily at the back of the hive, which was the beekeeper's dream we took a decade long to invent. Thanks so much for all of your great questions. Have a look at the beekeeper.org if you'd like a handhold, an online beekeeping course with experts from all over the world tuning in. It's free to try and also an amazing fundraiser for the bees. We've planted more than 1.5 million trees now in high quality ecosystems around the world to create more habitat for not only the European honeybee but all sorts of species that need habitat desperately. So have a look at the beekeeper.org if you want to have a look at a training course that's made to take you from square one right through to even a deep scientific knowledge in beekeeping. Gets rave reviews, so have a look, let us know what you think. Also, shoot us your questions, and if you have answers to other people's questions, chime in. It's wonderful to see the global community helping each other. Otherwise, we'll be here again next week for another show and tell. Thanks for joining us for this first live